10th meeting of the Street Reconstruction Task Force to be in session. Present are Chad Miller, Kathy, Chip, David, Don, Ahmed, Ralph. Absent currently is Matt, and Don from the, I got you. Don from the city is joining us. We will be working off of the summary of our options. It's interesting because Kathy, you and Ahmed were exactly where I was on the thought that we shouldn't assume what our residents feel. I've talked to Jennifer Benarat, as I did just with Chad too, on when we will go to find out how our residents feel. And Jennifer is in charge of communications for the city, and she's very good. She's been with us a long time. And she recommended that we have our meeting with council on November 17th. And we would wait and see if they wanted to go forward with all three proposals, one or two or none, before we go reach out for comments, because otherwise the fear is that it will be very confusing to the citizens if we call it down, if the council calls it down. So that's what we're going to do. And is there any response to that by anybody?
I had a question and it's sort of slash comment. So I was thinking, since 2 new council members will be joining since the beginning of January, does it make sense to wait, or does it make sense to present what we have to the existing council, because we know 2 of the members, deciders basically, are going to be different?
They'll be at the meeting. The 2 new members will be at the meeting.
Ah, I see.
We've structured this to have that meeting after the election purposely, so that they will join us and
excellent.
Hearing all the reasons. So I agree with you, Ahmed. It would not make sense, but they will be there.
Oh, very good. Are we physically meeting with them, or what is the logistics? Okay, just online. Okay.
So WebEx, just like this. Yep.
Let's see. Scott Denfield sent out the invitation, so you should look in your email.
Oh,
they haven't gone out yet.
It hasn't? Okay, I thought
they usually go out on the Monday before the meeting, just so they're not out there. So you're going to get a private link for WebEx, so you can participate different from the general public. So you get that link. Please don't share that with other people, because then they could come into the meeting and do their thing. So you'll get a link. Once I get it, I'll make sure Scott sends it to the whole task force.
And what time is the meeting for, so that I make sure that I don't?
It's 5:30 to 6:30. We have an hour with the council next Tuesday.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And it's the same platform. So you guys have been doing great on WebEx. It's the exact same thing.
Great. Excellent. Thank you.
And then towards the end of our meeting today, I think we'll talk about how we all want to participate in that meeting in individual ways. So does anyone have any questions on the summary through up till funding options for discussion? So basically information and background. You all gave like word changes and spelling and things like that. So I know you must have read through it. Chip is looking, so I'm going to give him a minute.
No, I'm good.
Matt just texted me. He's struggling on his computer to get on. Hope he is with us soon. So, yes, Ralph.
So the only point that I would make, and I've made it several times, but I don't think it's coming through with respect to how it's intended, is that it's my understanding that if I look at the typical $4 million of road reconstruction in a year, that the subcut has ranged anywhere from that on the projects that we specifically looked at. The portion of subcut of that $4 million has ranged from $450,000 up to $1.1 million. And the point that I've tried to make, and that isn't coming through in the document at this point, is that I agree that from a city's perspective, the subcut represents 28% or whatever of total spending. But if you turn that around and look at it from the homeowner's perspective, it can be as high as 40% of that project cost. At least that was my recollection, that when we looked at specific projects and that it was it was much higher than that 40% or 28%.
I can maybe answer that one, Ralph. The highest we've ever seen is, I'm going to mute you because then you come through. Highest is at 30%. We haven't seen projects have more than, and again, these are just general numbers. I mean, none of these numbers are right. They're just numbers to get us in the ballpark to have discussions. But I cannot recall an assessment that was 40% subcuts. But again, we haven't gone through a single project over the last 15 years of this current policy.
A question, Ralph, for you then, because our concept is that we're going to bring this to council. If they want us to further flush these three things out, then we may even bring in an outside group to assess costs of subcut and things like that. So we are very accurate when we present that in its final phase. That's, I think, also what Chad has said when he said, I'm going to use an average of 950,000, but we need to do this. So can you be comfortable at least going into our November 17th meeting if we talk about the fact that this detail needs a lot more definition?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's just that I think there's an important point that the impact to the homeowners can be much higher than the impact to the overall city from a math standpoint, but we'll move on.
Thank you. And I understand what point you're trying to make. I do accept that. So are we now down to the funding options for discussion section that we're going to talk about? Is that what I assume, that everyone didn't have any problem on information and background?
So, Ann, that those red lines that were in the last draft, that there's some commentary about it being, opinion or subjective. Is that going to be taken out or modified?
Well, I was talking to Kathy and Ahmed, right? I think you were just joining us. That was actually going to be my first thing I was going to talk about, was that I don't think we should, if we had a section that says the task force feels that this area might cause residents concern, you could say it that way, but I certainly wouldn't have any line in there that said residents feel or residents may not like, because I think it's really important, especially from my council point of view, is that all of our residents feel like they have the ability to talk about this before we make assumptions about them. And yes, Chad.
I'll just clarify Chip's note. So I'm working in that latest version, so I can as we go. So right before funding options, there was a sentence that said task force had general agreement on the following items. And number 3, I put in red line based on one of the group members' comments to me. And the red line was, it is difficult to prove benefit for all properties at 100% assessment, which I think I've heard the task force kind of agree on that point. And the last bullet point, or the number 5, it's no longer have subcut in the assessment. It is unfair. And I think that's,
Right.
Ann's point that the task force has this general agreement.
Yeah.
Those are right. And I think, Ann, you were talking about going down the advantages and disadvantages and getting rid of the opinions down there.
I would agree with that. I think we should do it all the way through the document. I think it just elevates the value of what we have done over the past 10 sessions. I would even go further. I would say, and we may not even need to have a separate section about, the advisory board feels this way or that way, because I think we should let the council really reflect all of that. My view would be to take out anything that has value, judgment, in it. But I'm just one opinion here. I would take anything out that has to do with that aspect in any of the in any of the bullet points or advantages, disadvantages. So.
I would just add, maybe Ann wants to chime in, but the council wants your opinion. That's why they formed the task force. Wants your opinion, and then they want to go to the public and get the public's opinion. So, and I only have like a few minutes, maybe an hour this afternoon to finish this before it's due. So I don't have a lot of time to edit what we have here. Keep that in mind as we talk through these changes.
Well, I think we might be just deleting. So,
yeah.
I think there's some things that I would like to focus on when we look at advantages and disadvantages. It's, can we prove benefit? Because that's based off of what our attorney said. We've talked about, does it mirror other cities around us? We've talked, certainly the chart talks about the tax effect on all residents. We've talked about how it affects current or recent assessments. And then we've talked about, do we collect from all users? And then the rest is just a transition timeline, which is pretty obvious based on the number of years. So if we just limit it to those things, then we don't get mucked into that opinion thing. Are we all comfortable with that? And we'll just go through and redline the opinion stuff. Okay. Yes, everybody. Okay. So on option number 1, advantages. Okay, there, I found it. Wait a minute. Option 1, advantages. Eventually all residents will have some assessments. That's a fact. Property owner can see what the assessment funds. Where are we on that? I tell you what, let's go up and down on these things. So the second one on number 1 is property owner can see what the assessment funds. Are we good with that, keeping that in? Okay. Accepted, Matt. Let's see, we have no video from Matt. He'll just have to speak when he doesn't like something. My internet is choppy is what he says. Okay. 3, accepted and legal process used by other cities. That's a fact. 50% funding directly corresponds to specific project costs and location. Fact. Keeps taxes related to street reconstruction lower for all residents than the 100% option. Do you want to keep that in? Ralph doesn't like that. Anybody else have an opinion on that one?
My opinion there is that whether they're taxed via special assessment or via the tax levy, at the end of the day, it's the same. And so it isn't lower taxes.
I agree with that assessment. That's my view as well.
Okay, David, Kathy, Chip, and Matt are kind of on the other side. Kathy, unmute yourself. Kathy, unmute yourself.
There we go. I think what he's saying is the total amount is the same, but when people see their tax bills, that's what they're reacting to. So I think that statement is really quite accurate. The tax part is less. The assessment is another part. When they add them together, they're the same, but the taxes will be less.
The tax levy
for people that aren't getting assessments.
Yeah, the tax levy, but will be less to each homeowner. But for those affected by the reconstruction, it won't be any lower.
But isn't this one talking about residents?
Okay, so you're saying, Kathy, that you would write it that, as it says, keeps tax levy related to street reconstruction lower for all residents than the 100% option.
That's factually true.
It's fine the way it is.
Well, I think you have to use the word levy because there seems to be some issue that,
That's fine.
I don't view the assessment as a tax the way a tax levy is. I agree it does charge the customer something.
May I offer another way of addressing both sides of this argument? What if we say keep taxes related to street reconstruction lower for residents who have not been assessed, so that we make it specific, that if you've not been assessed, but if you've been assessed, and to Rob's point, then depending on how you interpret taxes, you could say it's higher. So that's one way of, rather than saying all residents, those that haven't been assessed or aren't assessed, yes, their property taxes will go down. What do you think about that option?
Since it's comparing itself to the 100% option, that's not quite accurate because it's 50% versus 100% treats assessed people and unassessed people the same way. It's saying it's less expensive than the 100% or a lower tax levy than the 100% option.
I think Ralph and my point simply is that we want to make sure that this item E doesn't get misinterpreted. That's all. I mean,
Okay.
That's all. I mean,
you know what? Chad and I'll work on this along with maybe David and Ralph, and we'll keep it in that group and work out let's not get caught up too long on this one. F, tax exempt nonprofits are still part of the funding solution. That's accurate. Residents can retain the option to add additional work and pay for it. This to me is such a minor thing. I'm not really sure why we're putting it in this one. Chip, you want to talk to that?
Well, I'm not sure how major or minor it is, but is that differentiated from the other two options? In other words, can residents retain the option to add additional work under options 2 and 3 as well?
Not necessarily. We didn't really talk about paint. Chad, you want to talk to this? Maybe this is more you than anything else.
Well, I think the topics are still that we got to talk about after we hear all the feedback from council is streetlights. So if people want streetlights under assessments, we can say we just assess them more now. You're just going to let them do streetlights with 100% tax levy dollars or not, or retaining walls or pet fences. So those kind of items that, since you are specially assessed, you can agree to pay more to have those versus the tax one we don't know yet. So we could remove it. It's a discussion point for later.
Let's remove it and keep it in the later discussion point with council. What would they like to do with these? Do they want a standard streetlight plan for all streets and it's paid for by the city? Do they want, where do they want to go with that? How about we do that? And the final one, reduction in potential challenges regarding the benefit of the improvement. Okay, disadvantages.
Ralph had
Oh,
his hand up.
sorry, did someone have something to say?
Yeah, I guess reduction in successful challenges. I mean, that's really the key. Is that
Yes,
Chad?
Chad.
We've had both, so I just think any challenge is time and effort and money of the city. So if we can just reduce even potential ones, it's saving us money. So that's why we put potential, I guess.
Okay, let's move to disadvantages. Long period of transition induces future cost uncertainties. I don't get this one. Are you worrying about the increase, Chad, in the cost of doing things? Are you?
So, and I brought that point up. So, what happens is that that's true in finance, and Don can point to it. So, when you have longer term obligations, there are usually longer, there are more cost uncertainties. For example, that's why interest rate structure is upward sloping. In other words, longer term debts tend to be more, there's greater uncertainty about fluctuations, about shocks to the system than shorter term. So to the extent that in the 50-50 cases, some of the assessment, the incidence of assessment is still on homeowners. Those costs are still 1 year, for example, for whatever reason, there is, say, construction material being scarce or whatever. You get these shocks, and to the extent that homeowners have to bear those, the longer is that period of transition, the more those uncertainties would be incident on the homeowner.
Yeah, Chip.
Well, I agree with you, Hamid, about the long term and the upward sloping yield curve, which a lot of which is due to inflation impact. But the question is, how is this future cost uncertainty any different among the three options? That even in you have a 5-year transition, you have the potential for cost uncertainties there, and in years 8, 10, 12 under the 5-year transition, they still have to pay more.
That's right.
So
I'm glad both you and David pointed, and David had a communication with me as well, and you guys pointed that out. So the answer is that it's true. Whatever 5-year, 10-year, and so on. But the difference is that the incidence, to the extent that with a 50-50, half of that incidence of the special assessment is still on the homeowner, that the impact of that uncertainty, and it's, by the way, it's not just inflation, because in fact the yield curve is in real terms. It's other uncertainties, macroeconomic uncertainties that enter in. So to that extent, longer term transitions mean that the homeowner has to bear potentially some of these uncertainties if some costs spike up. Whereas when you smooth it with the taxes, that effect is not there.
So if I'm maybe another way to say that, Hamid, is that with long-term transition, the homeowner bearing a special assessment is subject to future cost uncertainties.
That's right.
Chad, did you get that?
Yep, say that one more time.
So repeat that, Chip.
Yeah, what I was the point is that during these longer transitions, when there's still going to be some special assessment to the homeowners, they have to bear that uncertainty as to that project cost. So if it's rolling out over 16 years, during that time, if they're assessed and it's a big there's a big cost increase, they have to take, whether it's 50% or a portion of that over the longer 100% conversion, as opposed to the 5-year conversion where then everybody shares in that across the whole.
That's right. That's exactly right. So Chad, I'm happy to send you a little rewrite, or else if you want to do that, given Chip's eloquent description, either one is fine. So
here are the notes I made on that. With long-term transition, homeowner bears future cost uncertainties.
I'd say homeowner being homeowner subject to special assessment.
Homeowner subject to special assessment. Okay.
Yeah. Or all or part. I guess, but we don't have all, so it's going to be that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's move along. Property owners don't like assessments for city street. We're going to strike that. I think we're going to have to figure out if they like it or don't like it. We want to hear from them. Continued potential challenges regarding the benefit of improvements. I think we have to be careful about this challenges part, because we got a pretty specific recommendation from our city attorney that at 50% he didn't see any problem with the challenges. So where you want to put that's one of the reasons that we have a 50-50 option and took it down to 50% was because of challenges, and we state that above, that at 50%.
If somebody was really invested in that, a way to word it would be just to compare it to the 100%. This is relatively higher or relatively higher risk than the 100% plan. I think it can be struck, but if somebody wanted to keep that idea, that's a way to frame it.
Ralph, you want to say something?
Yeah,
Ralph first, then Kathy.
Yeah, I guess I come back to the advantages being that a reduction in successful challenges will reduce all challenges. Because if we reduce it to 50%, the successful challenges are going to go down considerably. And given the risk to the homeowner, that they're just not going to pursue it. So I would strike it as a disadvantage, but under the advantage, it's really a reduction in successful challenges. But I really don't, I can go either way.
Kathy?
I would strike it as a disadvantage. I think what you said about our attorney advising us is very important, that's one reason we ended up at 50%. So we don't have
Okay.
to state that, but that is our thinking.
We'll strike that.
Mayor, just one quick point of information. I recall attorney talked about a 40% number. Does that, I don't remember whether that was a maximum elsewhere or an average elsewhere. And so, do you recall, Chad, what David's point was on that? Was it, I remember the
Opinion of
40%
what
number.
it was just
No.
numbers. There's no
Okay.
hard numbers because there's so many different policies throughout metro
Fine.
and state.
Fine. I'm okay with leaving it that way then.
I think we take out project approvals may continue to be subject to emotional public hearings. I don't like the term emotional. You can say that the project approvals will continue to be subject to public hearings, but you're going to, on the 100% ones, I would assume, Chad, wouldn't you still have a public hearing on street reconstruction?
We legally wouldn't have to, so that's a discussion for council if they still want to have those things, or do we just bring a big community engagement feedback report back for them to consider projects? So
Okay.
discussion point.
And
Yep.
I
Yes,
think
Chip.
you skipped over D there. Can only
Okay,
collect
well, I'll go back
what is
to D.
determined to be the benefit.
I'll go back after I do C, after I do E. I'll go back to D. So, but let's finish this E. So are we keeping it in and just getting rid of emotional, or? Yes, down, Ralph. Okay. Okay, let's go back then. Strike this, Chad, and let's go back to D, which I skipped over. Thank you. Can only collect what is determined to be benefit.
It would seem to me are we still going to be doing those assessments to determine what the benefit to the individual properties are, or under this scenario, or are we going to skip that step and we really don't have a quantitative benefit?
Well, Chad, we used to not do benefit, so obviously you've been doing benefit recently.
Just to justify assessments, and I think even if we go to 50%, there's still going to be question marks. So it really helps. It's a very small fee to have this benefit letter done to help council understand the benefits.
So is it a disadvantage to have a benefit level? I'm not sure why that's a disadvantage, Chad.
It's only if it doesn't meet if the assessments are higher than the benefit. So we could strike that too.
Okay.
Or else, Chad, you may want to modify it to say to the benefit if the residents feel it doesn't strike. I mean, either you have to have the full information in that bullet point, or just remove it. So I think I agree that it's kind of vague at this point. So if you want to say if it doesn't meet the benefit, fine. If it's too specific, then perhaps removing it would be fine.
We've already talked about benefit. Let's strike it and let's keep moving because we're going to run out of time and I want to get through everybody's. Residents often challenge the need for projects based on financial impact. I think we've talked about that with benefit. I just think we have to define the benefit part enough and we don't need to do these. Residents feel the street community is good. And again, we're talking about residents feel, we're trying to get rid of those. 50% of local streets have been completed. That's a disadvantage for all of them, right?
it is a disadvantage for all of them. What I would add there is have been completed under the special assessment process.
Okay, but then we just have that on all three then.
Yep, correct.
Okay, did you get that, Chad? So that's gonna get added on to 2, and it's gonna get added on to 3. And the final one, recently assessed properties may not support. I think that's, did you want to keep that or get rid of it because we're assuming they may not support it, or we pretty much know they won't?
Well, that fits into your feelings category, and I think we
Yeah.
want to wait to see what they say.
Okay, let's get rid of it.
May I just make one point though? I mean, there has to be some differences between the 50 versus the 100. So if we remove everything having to do with the disadvantages in terms of the comparison, I think we would not be able to make that comparison as succinctly. So I'm not entirely sure if we want to remove all of those things. I don't know what others feel.
Well, let's keep going to the other ones and see where we are in
Okay.
the other ones before you assume that we're removing all the disadvantages from 1 and not 2 and 3.
Could I make a comment, Anne?
Yes, Kathy.
With taking, we're taking out some points that even though they're about feelings and so forth, we think there are accurate. So maybe before we do the whole specific advantages, disadvantages, we could just include a couple sentences saying, we believe that, people they don't like to pay assessments, they don't like to pay taxes, any of that. We haven't forgotten about that. We haven't delineated it as something to weigh one of these against the other, because it really falls over the whole thing. People don't like to pay anything, assessments or taxes.
Well, we could have
a couple sentences somewhere.
We could have a general remark ahead of time that we are not making any assumptions about how our residents feel about the differences between taxes and assessments and how they've paid. And, we want to hear from our residents. I think it's good, Kathy, your idea that we say something about our need to hear from our residents on these things. So Chad, we'll work on a sentence that we just put before all this about that. How about that?
Already in there.
Yep.
Source will engage the community to seek comments on one or more of the items.
Just flush that out a little bit. Okay, after 2, advantages.
Dan,
Yep.
just real briefly, if you're doing another sentence, the only thing I might add, the difference really between the 5-year one and the 16-year one, I think part of our thought process is that if you do the 16-year transition, that it phases it in such a way that, I don't know, regardless of fairness, I guess the question is, it's more like the current assessment. So those who are recently assessed hopefully would be more inclined to think that that's a reasonable option. That was at least my thinking with the 16-year. I don't know how you word it, but I just think it might be worth including some sort of a reason why we did 16 versus 5. Maybe not, but.
Okay, we'll work on that separately and send that out to y'all. Boy, I'm sounding Southern, you all, sorry. Advantages, stable revenue stream for number 2. Yep. B, residents may have favorable response. I'm thinking we're getting rid of that. C, smaller monthly or annual fees instead of large lump sum or 15-year financing, which is, we're going to get rid of the COVID part. We've had difficult times without COVID. 2008 was a really difficult time for residents in the city. There's no reason to talk about COVID. So smaller monthly or annual fees instead of large lump sum or 15-year financing. Let's just stop at that. Collect money from most users of the system. You want to keep that? Okay. No need to prove benefit to property owner. Yes. Gradual movement to 100% tax funded, which reduces financial shock to homeowners. Easy to understand and administer. Most common method in Minnesota.
Ralph had a comment on that.
I'm sorry, Ralph, I missed you. Going back to easy to understand and administer.
So I guess, one of the things when we're talking about advantages here are advantages after 16 years. So as an example, no need to prove benefit to the property owner. That's only after the 16 years. You're still going to have that significant fight, year 1, year 2, year 3. So through all those years, you will have to prove benefit.
Okay, we'll add after 16 years. That's a good point. Go back to continue to F. Right? Oh no, we're on G. Easy to understand and administer. We keeping that? Okay. The most common method in Minnesota. I want to get rid of Minnesota. I'd like to be able to talk about among local communities, because really, after 12 years of council, I never worried about what Fergus Falls was doing with their streets or St. Cloud, or the only time we were ever looking at a change, we would say, well, what is St. Louis Park and Bloomington and Minnetonka and Richfield doing? So I don't think that's changed. Chad, has that?
Oh, so then I would strike that because most of our neighbors are a combination of special assessments, franchise fees, or taxes, depending on how they want to structure it. So I think we just strike that one.
Yeah, we already said we were the outlier, which was one of the reasons we were looking at changing that. Okay, so now we're on disadvantages. We went through that long period of transition induces future. So we're going to have to reword that kind of based on how we reworded it in number 1. Change in policy doesn't benefit previously assessed properties. Greater tax levy amount. Funds are not directly tied to specific project costs or location. Who wrote this one? Because this, again, I have questions about.
That was a city one. You're paying your taxes on your street, but if you don't see a street recon in 30 years, you're like, what am I paying taxes for? Because I don't see it. Versus if you have an assessment, you see exactly what you just paid for outside your front window.
Okay.
If I make a comment, kind of going off of what Ralph said before, that really only applies after the 16 years, right? During the implementation period, those funds are going to specific projects and homeowners are being assessed.
Well, I think we got to be careful if we're talking about advantages and disadvantages at the end of this or during the transition, right? I think what's appropriate for council to hear next Tuesday is what we're after.
I'd like to make a comment on this, if I may. It seems to me, both to echoing Ralph's point and Chip's point, that to the extent that you have written, Chip, the chat, you've written the way these two things, seems like in both cases for options 2 and 3, you're referring to after the transition period. And my sense is that there's got to be some distinction, either advantage or disadvantage, between options 2 and 3. And when I see almost the repeat of the bullet points, I feel that perhaps it's not as clear that we are talking about post-transition. And so something may have to be brought in with respect to how these two options differ, with respect to transition differences.
Okay. Point taken. We'll work on that. Let's go to E. Difficult to include tax exempt.
Kathy brought up a good point on that one. It's impossible. We've learned that from the attorney that after it's done, you can't.
So we're going to change that to impossible. Is that what you're saying?
Just say cannot include. That would be.
But just cannot. And
cannot include.
Impossible because that has.
Yeah.
Cannot
include tax exempt. Because we know we can. Yes.
Question. I'm wondering if council would like to know how much what the extent that is. How much we talk.
This talks about that. 557 tax exempt properties, which is 2.6%.
I'm just wondering if they'd like to see it in terms of for out of that 4 million, how much comes from these people today? Is that what the 2% means?
No, it's just the number of properties. So we have
Okay.
no idea.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to anticipate what the council might ask. And, then we say this is a disadvantage. What's the extent of it? We're going to get X dollars less that would have to be transferred over to taxes.
Just
We
a
would
few
ha-
percentage points.
Yeah, we would have to figure that out, looking at previous projects and what they'd been assessed and,
No, right now.
no.
Okay.
So I think a key point here that we talked about during our offsite down in engineering was that it is in fact 557 properties that fall into this category. But when you back out of that number, city-owned properties and schools, which you end up paying taxes on anyway, that we're down to, I thought, like 100 properties. And so, which is, an even much smaller percentage. And I think that is really what's key, because at the end of the day, whether the city, pays itself to then turn around and tax the residents, it isn't 557 properties.
I recall that conversation, and it might be important to somehow reflect the gist of that issue, as Rob suggests. But I don't know exactly how you do that. I'm not sure in this bullet point. But I do recall that it ended up being much smaller than the number seems to suggest.
That's the number of city properties.
Yeah, there's 450 city properties and 17 school district properties.
It's really just churches, synagogues, hospital, things like that. If we're taxing ourselves, we're not including, to me, any city properties in that, even though right now we figure out for parks and we help pay for that. The school district, yes, they tax, but they tax for a different reason. We don't get that money from them. So the only way you get school money for streets is to specifically assess them. Okay, if recently assessed properties may not support, isn't that another opinion?
So we're agreed that we're going to go with like 100 properties on that?
We're going to use a better definition of the properties. I think we're just going to use more what they are.
Or we could simply say of which there are so many city properties and so on. We could modify that sentence, something.
I think we're just going to clean that up.
Yeah.
Okay, F. Can we strike? Everybody good? Okay, moving right along. Option 3, stable revenue stream. That's similar to option 2. Residents may have a favorable response. We're striking that. We changed and got rid of the COVID stuff. So smaller monthly or annual fees instead of large lump sum or 15-year financing. We're going to find a way, by the way, to define better the difference between 6 years and 16 years. So wait on that until we get to the end of this. Collect money from most users of the system. Why?
Get that one above. We kept it above.
Okay.
It comes right back to the non-taxable properties. It's one and the same.
Okay. No.
It's the same as the other one. Everything is the same as the other one, except for the gradual movement option there.
No need to prove benefit to property owner, and that we added after 16 years on that. Easy to understand and administer, and then most common method, we are striking that. Okay, disadvantages. Change in policy doesn't, yep. Greater tax levy amount, yep. Fast movement. Okay, so this fast movement, a faster movement. This is where you wanted to talk about the difference between 6 years and 16 years, correct? So
And if I may, so it seems to me that the fast movement would be disadvantage to those that have paid their special assessment and an advantage to those that haven't paid. So it seems like there is sort of we can't really say whether fast is a disadvantage or an advantage, right? So we have to think about, I mean, yes, that seems to be a one distinction between the 5 year versus option 3 versus option 2, but
Yep.
it's not clear whether it's necessarily a disadvantage if you haven't paid your special assessment.
So we just need to add for those who have recently paid.
Something to that effect.
Well, if I could just add to that, the benefit to the 16-year over the 6 year, I think, is one of those is that it is a gradual as opposed to being the fast, because the homeowner can adapt to a change in the tax better, and over that 16 years, then over the 6 years, all of a sudden, if they have this hit to them, it's being done in 6 years. That's a more difficult thing perhaps to adapt to.
So we do have that as an advantage in 2, which is number F. And then it becomes a disadvantage here, which I think is appropriate. I think that's what you're trying to say. As long as we talk about, as long as we add, if it's going to be a disadvantage, that it's for those who have recently paid.
Yeah, I think both of those points depends on your perspective.
Yes.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder here.
It is. And you'll hear from our residents about that too, trust me. D, funds are not directly tied to specific project costs or location. Is that the after 6 years?
That's
Because we
that
added
idea.
after 16 years on the other one. Okay, so then we add after 6 years at the end of that. J, A, B, C, D, J, or whatever that is. Difficult to, we need to renumber that. It's E. Difficult to include tax exempt, yep, and we're going to redefine that and clean up the list a little bit for you. And recently assessed properties may not support. I think we've taken that out because that's more of an opinion. Okay, that goes through all these. Are we good? Because we only have 13 minutes and I'd like to talk about how we're going to conduct our meeting. Yes, Chip.
I'd just like to ask one other question that came up to me as I was reviewing all this, make sure I'm in the same understanding. And historically and today, the city comes up with a project and assesses all the owners for the cost of that project. Going forward, is the city going to be limited by a 4 million budget that is going to be part of the tax base, or is the tax levy going to change each year based on the upcoming project, so that projects need to stay within that $4 million level, and any excess funds would be held back for future use for street reconstruction? Or if there's any shortfall, how would that ever get funded if we're sticking to the 4 million?
I'll let Chad talk to that.
Yeah, to answer your question, Chip, we would craft the project areas to be as close to 4 million as we could. If we have a subcut number or we collect extra, then I ran an idea by the city manager yesterday to have a street investment fund or something like that for the overages and underages that happen over time. And if we set the subcut number where it's set in this memo, I think we're going to eventually collect more money than we need, and we can start to use that for street lighting, retaining walls, and some other items within street reconstruction that's maybe not covered. So that was going to be a topic for this group that I was going to bring up later after we got council feedback to see where they're telling us to go first before we have those discussions.
Hey, Chad.
Yep.
Do you believe that that's the case in accounting for inflation?
Don's numbers included inflation when we looked at this.
Right.
I mean, I just find it hard to believe that we're going to be able to construct the same mileage of streets every year 10 years from now for $4 million.
But we can't. But there's the
He put
scenarios Don put together, it included a 3% inflation.
So from that perspective, then I just need to understand. So are you building this in? So every year there's going to be a percentage of the city budget. You know, we talked about those numbers with tax increases from year to year. Is that going to be artificially higher if we go to the 100% because you're constantly adjusting that up, which means there's going to be a levy increase for every year based on inflation?
No, the increase to the levy every year, Don, maybe you can speak to it. It already includes that 3% inflation in there. So if we're saying over 16 years, the levy has to go up 0.25% every year, it's already in that number that we're presenting.
But I think Matt is then saying so that after 16 years, the levy will have to continue to increase
Oh, yeah.
built in, and it will for a 50/50 model too, just not as much.
Which from a city perspective and the council's perspective, I mean, one thing that's interesting is that trades off with other investments that they might be interested in making. So I'm just throwing that out there from the perspective of politics, right?
Yep, it does.
So that's to kind of riff off of what Matt just said. So if we're saying it's a 3% increase or built into that, whatever the overall tax levy is, if the tax levy overall, let's say is 1%, which, you know, are we still going to get 3% for street reconstruction, or is that going to fluctuate as well?
Is that a question to Don?
Well, it's a set number every year. So I'm going to go back to the table of charts we put together. So depending on if you're looking at the 5-year scenario, years 2 through 5, you've already baked in a 1.86% levy increase. So you can't go less than that if you want to adopt this policy as a council. And in that 1.86 over those 5 years is 3% inflation.
Which then, so this budget, I think we talked about, right, was 5% is what the council proposed this year. So then the 5% becomes 6.8% and then every year into the future. So it's sticker shock every single year for 16 years for people in the city. And then there's something beyond that, right, for inflation every year into the future. Is that accurate?
Council would have to consider this change in the levy every year with all their other priorities, if that's what you're asking. So if it's, you know, they don't have a budget for 22, but if they set it at 4%, you pick one of these, portion of that 4% is already street construction. So other priorities either get less or you raise the levy more to meet those other priorities.
Yep.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that that was accurate.
So
Since we're discussing that, should we add something to that effect in the report so it's very clear to the council?
it's
Will it
clear
be
the
clear?
council, they do levy
It's
work
clear?
all the time.
Yeah.
This is the worst part of the council work. Trust me, levy. It's the scariest part. You know, you can want to do a lot of things for your city, but it always costs money, and you always know that doing something like this puts a huge burden on people. Anything. Let's talk about that meeting though. Okay, so we have an hour for that meeting. Does anyone have a strong opinion on how they would like to see us as a group present this, other than me, because I seem to be talking too much?
I would guess you have some good ideas, having been on the council.
Well, I'd like them to hear from all of us a little bit. So I would ask, you know, maybe David to present option 1. Chip, you are option 2. And then Ralph or Hamid to
I think
present
Ralph
option
would be. I'd like to have Ralph present option 3. I'm going to defer to Ralph. So if that's okay with you, Ralph, yeah. Okay.
I'm going to start by probably giving a little overview, but I really want Chad to explain why we took out subcut, because that was one of those aha moments for all of us when we were getting a lot of information. So I want them to understand what the reasoning is behind that. I think that's important that, you know, as Ralph and I have talked about, having a stable base for every street, and that's the responsibility of the city. And we'll figure out a way, Chad, maybe how you want to do that. But you had a really good image one time of what a street costs are. And that, for me at least, was the aha moment. I'm kind of a visual person. I'd like to have that included. Is that okay with everybody?
Good idea.
Okay.
And
I
then
want to give a lot of time for the council to ask questions and give us feedback. So Chip, David, and Ralph, I'm thinking that your presentation is maybe 6 minutes. So that's, yep, okay.
5 minutes.
5, okay, we're going 5, is that 5? Okay, so that's 15. I'll start with about 5. That's 20. Chad will be in there, we'll give him 5. Don, do you have any need to speak preliminarily?
No,
Okay, and then that gives us 35 minutes for them to come back and ask us questions and give us some feedback. We can talk at that point about, you know, how we might then reach out through Jennifer and the marketing communications department about getting feedback, and we will give them probably our timeline then of taking their recommendations of which ones they want us to go forward with, and, you know, maybe getting a better subcut cost and other things that I've heard from you guys today. Is that okay?
And I have one question slash comment. So as Ralph is going to present our point, would that be okay if there is a small point to be made parenthetically for the other part, in this case me, to clarify? Let's say there is a point that I feel that might be made more succinctly or in a different way. Should the other person be able to say something, or just one person?
No, that gets too confusing and it really sucks up time. Having been at these meetings before, I
Okay.
can tell you time suck is what we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
You certainly we will be asked questions though after we give these 3 about certain aspects of them. You might be then one to answer that if that's
Okay,
important.
sounds good. So if Ralph doesn't mind, I think I would like to interact with you, make sure that we're on the same page. If that's okay with you. Good.
I'd really
Thank you.
appreciate that. I'm sure David, if he has any questions, will reach out to Matt, Kathy, and me for his presentation. Chip, you're a lone ranger. The other thing I want to tell you is we don't vote at meetings like this as a council. Sorry, get rid of the we word. You don't ever vote. You don't ever have a motion. That's not how this meeting works. But we will ask for people's opinions, and those actually become kind of their vote, if I can say that. So I will be very specific, asking for direction moving forward for all 3.
So Ann,
And then
will this be the sum total of our feedback from the council, or will there be some follow-up afterwards?
this will most likely be it. So you'll hear
yeah.
it there. Staff will take notes. It's recorded too, so we can get that, and then we learn how to move forward. Right? Staff always has to kind of interpret what we're hearing to move forward, but eventually council's going to approve something. The only thing I'll add is I'll take the memo that we're doing and create a PowerPoint. So, you know, whoever, David, Chip, and Ralph, I'll take kind of these key points and put them on a PowerPoint slide after we finish this memo here today.
You know, I ended up running all those meetings because the mayor opted out of running them the last, I don't know, what was it, 6 years I was on council. So trust me, I'm really good at calling on everyone and drawing out their opinion. I don't let anyone sit quietly and then, you know, 5 meetings later say, well, I didn't like that. So that's the one advantage you have. You have a bully up here sometimes.
Well, will someone be talking through that funding options table? I think that can be a little confusing, and so I don't know if anybody's, you, Ann, or Chad or Don want to talk through that, explain it to the council.
I think that'd be part of your discussions with each option. I'll put that slide and you can just read from the slide or however to tell council those impacts if you're comfortable doing that.
If there are
Let's try to keep them all separate,
yeah.
I think, right, Ann? Keep them separate. Here's the funding impacts and advantages, disadvantages. Then we go to number 2, you talk about funding and all those pieces.
Yep.
And then I'll have a summary slide at the end. I'll take this whole table at the end. So this is what they're going to want to look at and compare probably.
Yeah.
Chad, you might make sure that the person that's going to present is going to be comfortable. So you may have to interact with them just in terms of the specifics of the slides, right?
I'll send all the slides out to the whole group. I'll run the slides so you don't have to do anything. I'll try to keep it only to 1 or 2, so we don't have to flip a lot of slides, but, just tell me to move to the next one and I can manage all that.
So here's what I'm
So-
going to tell you right now. So we're cleaning up a list of the tax exempt properties. And one other, what was the other thing?
There's one thing.
I'm sending you a rewording of that cost uncertainty. The word about cost uncertainty, I'm going to
Yep, we
send
got that one.
a rewarding based
we got
on.
that.
I think we reworded that. It says with a long period of transition,
Right.
homeowners subject to special assessments bear future cost uncertainties. We already
Right.
reworded that.
Chad,
Are we going to see the report that you're editing, Chad?
Yeah, once I've got feedback on all these points, then I can.
But what I'm going to tell you is we're not going to change his report. We're not going to go and start sending him notes the day before. And
It's done today. I got to have it done today.
yeah,
So I
it has to be
literally
finished.
have
Right.
done by today, and I got 3 more meetings. So that was the point of trying to. We're getting it close. It's
trying to make
up to a point.
If I could just stress one thing, though, what I really hope we see in there is some acknowledgement that we understand people will have some serious feelings about their assessments or taxes, et cetera. I think we can put something like that in. That's what I was hoping.
Yep, that's the note I made, that we are going to flush that one sentence out a little bit more. Chad included something about it, but we're going to make sure that it talks a little bit more about the feedback that we are expecting we'll have from our residents on taxes and assessments.
Chad, when do you expect to have the PowerPoint shared with us?
Probably Monday, something like that.
Okay.
Maybe Friday. That to give us maybe a day to review it and quick tweak it. It's usually just, if it's based right off a memo, there shouldn't be a lot of changes.
So it's really important on meetings like this that we give the information ahead of time to the council to allow them plenty of time to read it. It also is available to all of our residents, so they'll know that this is happening, which is really good. And then this meeting, there are a number of people that do watch or listen later to work sessions. So it'll be important to have all that there too. Okay.
Are we going to speak to the very end of our report, the things that we haven't done yet, or just leave that for them to read about?
We'll have that listed and they can ask us about it if we have time, and we've whipped through this faster than I expect. I will certainly say, where are your feelings on street lighting? We already have a sidewalk plan. So we'll try to get some feedback on that if we have time. Kathy,
Okay.
anything else? Great, thank you. Meeting is adjourned at 12:03.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.